reflect the best traditions and in the times of great need. And he gave a helping hand to the Hungarian nation and earned the enduring gratitude of the Hungarian American community on this day, in this place. Please join me in celebrating the 2009 honoree, Mr. John C. Whitehead.
Wow. When I was asked to come down here tonight, I was told that there was going to be a small dinner, maybe something like 15 or 20. And I didn't expect this wonderful turnout. And particularly grateful to all my old friends in Washington who are here tonight and for their giving up an evening to come to this event, even though they don't have much to do with Hungary. But I'm lucky I have much to do with those old friends and much to do with Hungary. And so I'm very proud of the things that I've done in Hungary. I'd like to tell you, maybe, if I may, just a little bit about that first experience that I had with Hungary when I didn't know very much about Hungary or have any special feeling towards it. My wife and I were on vacation in Vienna, and I had just been told that I was to become a partner of Goldman Sachs, where I had worked for 8 or 9 years, and that was a thrilling career achievement. And so my wife and I were taking a vacation around Europe, and one particular night we're in Vienna, and I was having breakfast in a little cafe in Vienna with an old friend, a young man that had been a colleague of mine in other activities. And in the middle of that breakfast, a very disheveled fellow came charging into the restaurant and looking for my friend that I was eating with. And he poured out, sat down at the table, and poured out the story of the freedom fighters in Hungary. I had read a little bit about this, and I had the sort of instinctive feeling that the United States had encouraged Hungary to revolt against the cruelty of the Soviet leadership. And when they did, we didn't do much about it, and they were being this was the stage at which they had been really largely defeated, but they were still fighting in little isolated pockets around the country, with many of the freedom fighters having already been killed, but with others still fighting on. And he poured out a story of what they needed, and it was radios to communicate with the other groups, to see where the other groups were and what they were doing. It was outboard motors to escape across the lake that represented the common boundary between Hungary and Austria. It was pharmaceuticals for wounds and other medicines and medical supplies. And it was quite a long list, and he said, I came across the lake last night hoping to get these for my unit of freedom fighters and to distribute elsewhere, and was appealing to my friend, who was a businessman in Vienna, to give him some help. And I was so affected by this that my wife and I cut short our vacation and went back to New York, and I spent the last 3 or 4 days of my vacation time accumulating these things. And I remember, because I was calling up the heads of companies that manufactured these things, I was calling up General Sarnoff, who was then the head of RCA that made the communications equipment, walkie-talkies to talk back and radio equipment. I called him up and said, General, you don't know me, but I'm a partner at Goldman Sachs, and on I went, and that was enough of a byline for him to agree to supply the radios for nothing. And Outboard, a company called Outboard Marine, which made powerful engines for boats, was equally bamboozled by me to supply a slew of outboard motors. And the pharmaceutical companies were all extremely generous and immediately forwarded all the things that we possibly could have wanted in the way of drugs and medicines. And then I called up Pan Am and asked if they would supply a plane to fly this over, and they said yes. And 72 hours after this breakfast event in Vienna, I was on that Pan American freight plane with all this stuff loaded aboard, and landed at the Vienna airport, where my friend that I'd been practicing with had trucks which carried the materials all down to the piers, put them on a barge that was then towed across the river or the lake, and those things arrived in Hungary just 3 days after we started to work on it. It wasn't, and I felt very pleased to have had a little role in that military event, which ended up pretty tragically for Hungary. And that caused my interest in Hungary. And so whenever Middle or Central or Eastern Europe came up again, I always volunteered for things, and it's a number of times in my life I've had the opportunity to come back to Hungary and do other things as it gradually was weaned itself away from the yoke of the Soviets and became once again independent. Although those of you who were there at that time realize that while the Soviet oppression was pretty severe, Hungary never really was conquered. They still had an awful lot of free activities that went on under the underground in various ways. And the last thing I really did with Hungary was when Governor Pataki persuaded me to come out of a long retired life and come back and go to work for restoring Lower Manhattan. And he did all these wily things to get me to do it. But at the time I didn't know he was Hungarian. But then I realized it, and I should have known better. He proved that old adage about Hungarians that they're only people that can go into a revolving door behind you and come out ahead of you. And I was the person in the revolving door that, after I had done this was a sort of no-term, no-limit undertaking, and I did it for 5 years. And finally, I was ground down. I lost about 6 inches in the process of that job in height, and gained about 60 pounds in weight during that time. But then I realized that the governor was Hungarian and that I should have beware of it. He confessed at one time that he had expected that I would only do it for a year, and that would be all he could get out of me. But when the year was up, he always said, well, just do it a little longer, John. We'll find somebody else to take your place, but he never did. Anyhow, he's a pretty sneaky guy, but he was a great governor, and this was only one story of his triumphs over adversity. It's really good to see you all again, and I'm so proud of this award, and so proud of all the things that I've done for Hungary. It's my second favorite country in the world. Thank you.